And as I have rather large feet, once I was up on toe, you can imagine I was a very tall dancer.
Breakfast at Tiffany's is one of the most beloved films in Hollywood history. A timeless classic that gave us Audrey Hepburn's iconic black dress, the haunting melody of Moon River, and a romance that captured the world's heart. But behind the glamour and the unforgettable scenes lay a production consumed by conflict, ego, and controversy. One actor's behavior was so toxic, it divided the entire cast. Another performance was so offensive, it would haunt the film for decades. The truth behind the making of this classic will shock you. The Road to Tiffany's. The journey of Breakfast at Tiffany's, from Truman Capote's dark novella to one of the most beloved films in Hollywood history, was anything but straightforward. Truman Capote's 1958 novella was a sensation, a sharp and melancholic portrait of a young woman navigating the shadows of New York City. The story was gritty, raw, and unflinching. In the novella, Holly Golightly was not the whimsical socialite audiences would come to know. She was a call girl, a woman who traded companionship for money, and whose life was marked by tragedy and uncertainty. Capote had written the character with a specific actress in mind, a woman whose own life mirrored Holly's in haunting ways. He wanted Marilyn Monroe. Paramount Pictures acquired the film rights and immediately faced the challenge of transforming Capote's dark material into something that would appeal to mainstream audiences. The studio hired screenwriter George Axelrod, a man who had previously made structural changes to source material while adapting The 7-Year Itch. Axelrod approached this project with a similar willingness to deviate. He radically sanitized Holly's character, transforming her from a wounded, fluid call girl into a whimsical, eccentric socialite whose improprieties were charming rather than sordid. He introduced a conventional Hollywood happy ending that did not exist in the book. One where Holly and Paul Varjak end up together, complete with a kiss in the rain that has become one of cinema's most iconic images. The changes were made to commercialize the storyline and to persuade a reluctant Audrey Hepburn to accept the part. The original director hired for the project was John Frankenheimer. He worked with Axelrod for 3 months on the adaptation, but his tenure was short-lived. When Audrey Hepburn was approached about the project, she reportedly stated that she had never heard of Frankenheimer and refused to work with an unproven director. Hepburn's agent requested a higher-profile director, and Frankenheimer was replaced by Blake Edwards. Edwards would go on to shape the film into the romantic comedy that audiences know today. The casting of Holly Golightly was a saga in itself. Capote had explicitly written the character with Marilyn Monroe in mind, and he fiercely lobbied Paramount to cast her. He considered Monroe to best reflect the character, believing she had something touching about her that was unfinished. The parallels between Monroe and Holly were striking. Both were small-town girls who had reinvented themselves, changing their names and their identities. Monroe's own story mirrored Holly's in ways that seemed almost prophetic. But Monroe declined. Her acting coach advised her that playing a call girl would completely ruin her career. Monroe, who was trying to escape being typecast as a symbol of attraction, chose instead to star in The Misfits. It was a decision that would haunt both her and the film. After Monroe passed, the producers pursued a parade of actresses. Shirley MacLaine turned it down in favor of another project. Kim Novak also declined. Joanne Woodward was considered before the role was finally offered to Hepburn. Hepburn was highly insecure about her casting. She publicly told producers and the New York Times that she could not play such a role. The character frightened her, and she worried that it was entirely out of her range. She was an introvert, being asked to play an extrovert, and the challenge seemed overwhelming. It was only when Blake Edwards convinced her that he could mold the performance to fit her instinctual style that she finally agreed. Later, she would admit it was the best thing she had ever done, because it was the hardest. The search for the male lead was equally complicated. The producers fiercely wanted Steve McQueen for the role of Paul Varjak, but McQueen was forced to decline because he was locked into his ironclad television contract for the CBS show Wanted Dead or Alive. Jack Lemmon was approached but was unavailable. Robert Wagner was also reportedly considered. Ultimately, George Peppard was selected, despite having appeared in the failed film The Subterraneans the previous year. His casting would prove to be one of the most fraught decisions of the production. Filming began on October 2, 1960, with 8 days of location shooting in New York City. The film was shot on a budget of roughly $2.5 million and wrapped on February 3, 1961. But the real drama was happening behind the scenes, where one actor's behavior would alienate the entire cast and leave lasting resentment. The drama behind the camera. The making of Breakfast at Tiffany's was a production fraught with conflict, creative battles, and personal turmoil that rivaled anything on the screen. Behind the glamour and the iconic moments lay a set that was often tense, uncomfortable, and even dangerous. One of the most dramatic battles occurred over the song Moon River. Paramount's head of production, Marty Rakin, vehemently hated the song after an early screening. He believed it was too slow, too melancholic, and would bore audiences. He aggressively ordered it completely excised from the movie's final print. The order was a devastating blow to composer Henry Mancini and lyricist Johnny Mercer, who had poured their hearts into the composition. They had written the song specifically for Hepburn, tailoring it to her limited vocal range and her unique style. Mancini later admitted that he had struggled to find the right melody, but when he finally did, he knew it was special. Rakin's dismissal of the song was a blow to their artistic pride, but it was Audrey Hepburn who ultimately saved it. Hepburn famously jumped up from her chair, slammed her hand on the conference table, and told him that she would not allow them cut the song. Her fierce defense of the song was a testament to her artistic instincts, and it ensured that one of the most beloved songs in cinema history would remain in the film. The logistical challenges of filming were equally daunting. To pull off the iconic dawn opening sequence, Tiffany & Co. broke its strict operations policy for the first time since the 19th century. The jeweler opened its flagship store doors on a Sunday to allow cameras inside, a concession that reflected the studio's determination to capture the perfect shot. The scene, which features Hepburn standing outside the store with her coffee and croissant, has become one of the most recognizable images in film history. But the reality of filming it was far from glamorous. Hepburn was not a morning person, and she had to be on set at dawn for multiple takes. The crowds that gathered to watch the filming added another layer of difficulty. The scene required precise timing, and the pressure to get it right was immense. The crew worked tirelessly to achieve the perfect shot, and their efforts paid off in what would become one of the most iconic opening sequences in cinema. The legendary cocktail party scene was a nightmare for the cast and crew. The scene required a realistic smoke haze to hang in the air, but the crew could not achieve the effect using conventional methods. They brought in a commercial beekeeper's smoker, which filled the enclosed studio set with toxic, thick smoke that left the cast and extras gasping for fresh air. The conditions were hazardous. Despite the discomfort, the cast pushed through, delivering performances that captured the chaotic energy of the party. Hepburn was enduring profound personal psychological trauma during the filming. She had suffered a highly publicized and devastating miscarriage, and the emotional scars were still fresh. The loss had been tragic, and she was still grieving. She was a private person, and she struggled to maintain her composure while performing scenes that required her to be bubbly and carefree. The pressure was immense, and it took a toll on her health and well-being. She leaned heavily on her husband, Mel Ferrer, for support, but the demands of the production were relentless. There were days when she could barely function, but she never let her personal struggles affect her performance. The final alleyway rain sequence was the absolute most miserable shoot of Hepburn's entire cinematic career. She was a known perfectionist, and she also harbored an intense real-life aversion to cats. The scene required her to search for and clutch a wet cat in the pouring rain, a task that was deeply unpleasant for her. The rain was cold, the cat was uncooperative, and the hours of shooting left her exhausted and frustrated. Hepburn later admitted that she had been extremely uncomfortable during the scene, but she had to work through it, constantly worried about the cat's well-being while trying to convey the emotional weight of the moment. The vulnerability she captured in that scene is a testament to her extraordinary acting ability. She was able to channel her discomfort into a performance that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. The cast and crew endured executive battles, hazardous conditions, and personal tragedies. But the tension with a particular actor would prove to be the most difficult challenge of all. And when the truth finally came out, it would shock everyone who had worked on the film. The star who divided the set. The tension that had been building throughout the production of Breakfast at Tiffany's finally found its focal point in one man. George Peppard, the actor chosen to play Paul Varjak, would prove to be the most divisive presence on set, alienating his co-stars, challenging his director, and creating an atmosphere of hostility that would define the production. Director Blake Edwards had loathed the studio's choice of Peppard from the very beginning. Edwards was a filmmaker with a clear vision for the film, and he had envisioned a different actor for the role. Someone who could bring warmth, charm, and a sense of effortless cool to Paul Varjak. He believed that the character needed to be grounded, relatable, and genuinely likable, a counterbalance to Holly's eccentricities. But the studio had other ideas. They saw Peppard as a rising star, a leading man with the right look and the right credentials. When the decision was made to sign Peppard, Edwards was so distraught that he reportedly dropped to his hands and knees on the floor in front of producers Richard Shepard and Martin Jurau, crying out and begging them not to sign Peppard's contract. He pleaded with them to reconsider, arguing that Peppard was the wrong choice for the film. The scene was dramatic, a desperate plea from a director who knew that the wrong actor could destroy the film. But the producers were unmoved. They had made their decision, and Peppard was hired. Peppard was an intense student of Lee Strasberg's method style of acting, a technique that required actors to draw on their own emotions and experiences to create authentic performances. In theory, the method could produce powerful, nuanced work. But Peppard's approach was ill-suited to the light-hearted romantic comedy that Blake Edwards was trying to create. He brought an overly aggressive, humorless gravity to the set, treating the script as if it were a heavy Shakespearean tragedy. The friction was immediate and intense. Peppard's seriousness clashed with Edwards's vision, and the tension between them grew with each passing day. Edwards wanted lightness and whimsy. Peppard wanted depth and intensity. The two were fundamentally incompatible. Peppard flatly refused to take creative direction from Edwards. He openly challenged the director's authority on set, loudly rewriting his own blocking and trying to lecture Edwards on how to frame film shots. It was a shocking display of arrogance, a complete disregard for the director's vision. Edwards would call for a certain blocking or a specific reading of a line, and Hepburn would ignore him, doing the opposite of what he was asked. He would then lecture Edwards on the finer points of filmmaking, as if he, not the director, was the one in charge. Edwards was frustrated, but he was also powerless. The studio had hired Hepburn, and there was little he could do to control him. The power dynamic was toxic, and it poisoned the atmosphere on set. Audrey Hepburn, who was notoriously gentle and non-confrontational, was pushed to her absolute limit. Hepburn was a professional who had never been known to speak ill of her co-stars. She believed in maintaining a positive, collaborative environment on set, and she went out of her way to be kind to everyone she worked with. But Hepburn's behavior was so terrible that she broke her lifelong rule of professional silence. She openly called Hepburn pompous, arrogant, and hard to deal with. She noted that his severe lack of warmth ruined their working chemistry. The romantic scenes that were supposed to be charming and tender were instead marked by tension and discomfort. Hepburn, who had already been struggling with personal trauma, found Hepburn's behavior unbearable. She would later admit that she had never worked with anyone so difficult, and that his presence had made the production a deeply unhappy experience. Co-star Patricia Neal, who played the wealthy socialite in the film, initially championed Hepburn. She had been impressed by his talent and had hoped that they would work well together. Neal was a respected actress in her own right, and she had no patience for diva behavior. But as filming progressed, her opinion changed dramatically. In her official autobiography, she wrote that Hepburn's explosive ego, condescending attitude, and constant attempts to hog the screen made her completely dislike him by the time filming wrapped. Neal noted that Hepburn seemed to view acting as a competition rather than a collaboration, and he would do whatever it took to dominate every scene. Producer Richard Shepard was stunned by how venomous Hepburn was to work with. In production logs, he noted that Hepburn actively tried to sabotage Hepburn's confidence during their shared scenes. Hepburn would intentionally deliver his lines in ways that threw Hepburn off balance, making her feel insecure and uncertain. The behavior was calculated and cruel, a deliberate attempt to undermine the film's star. Shepard wrote that he had never seen such behavior on a set before, and he was deeply troubled by it. The studio had hired Hepburn because they believed he would be a box office draw, but they had not anticipated the chaos he would bring. The personal animosity toward Hepburn was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The damage he caused to the set's atmosphere was profound, and it would take years for the full extent of his behavior to be revealed. The film that was supposed to be a light-hearted romantic comedy had become a battlefield, and the scars would last long after the final credits rolled. But the scandals surrounding Breakfast at Tiffany's were not limited to one actor. The film's legacy was also marred by a deeply offensive character portrayal that would overshadow its achievements for decades. The Mr. Yunioshi controversy was a stain that the film could never fully wash away, a reminder of Hollywood's long history of insensitivity and cultural appropriation. The Mr. Yunioshi controversy. The legacy of Breakfast at Tiffany's would forever be stained by a single, deeply problematic performance. While the film is celebrated for its iconic moments, its music, and Audrey Hepburn's luminous presence, it is also remembered for one of the most offensive characterizations in Hollywood history. Producer Richard Shepard recognized the severe cultural insensitivity of the script's caricature from the very beginning. He knew that casting a white actor to play the Japanese landlord would be offensive and damaging, not just to the film's reputation, but to the Asian American community. Hepburn fought bitterly with studio executives to hire an actual Japanese actor for the role. He believed that authenticity was essential, that the character should be portrayed with dignity and respect. But the studio was resistant. They were more concerned with commercial appeal than cultural sensitivity, and they were not willing to take a risk on an unknown actor. Blake Edwards, the film's director, completely bypassed his producers and aggressively insisted on casting legendary white Hollywood actor Mickey Rooney for the part. Edwards believed that Rooney's comedic talents would bring the character to life in a way that a lesser-known actor could not. He was convinced that Rooney's performance would be funny, that audiences would appreciate the humor of the exaggerated caricature. He dismissed Hepburn's concerns, arguing that the character was a comedic stereotype and that it would be understood as such. The decision was made, and Rooney was cast. To achieve the character's look, the makeup department subjected Rooney to a series of degrading physical alterations. They taped his eyelids back to create a slanted appearance, a grotesque imitation of Asian features. They fitted him with a massive, custom prosthetic dental buck teeth that made his mouth appear distorted. They heavily darkened his skin tone to create a cartoonish approximation of a Japanese man. The transformations were dehumanizing, a cruel reduction of an entire culture to a series of exaggerated physical traits. Rooney himself later admitted that he was uncomfortable with the makeup, but he went along with it because he trusted Edwards' vision. Edwards instructed Rooney to adopt an offensive, wildly over-the-top accent that completely alienated Asian American communities upon the film's release. The performance was a barrage of stereotypes, a caricature that reduced the Japanese people to something they weren't. The character was not a person, but a punchline, a source of cheap laughs at the expense of an entire culture. The audience reaction was immediate and negative, and the criticism was relentless. Asian American activists condemned the portrayal, and the film's reputation was permanently tarnished. In his later years, Edwards publicly recanted the decision, stating that casting Rooney was the absolute single biggest creative blunder and regret of his entire professional career. He acknowledged that he had been wrong, that the performance was offensive and damaging. He expressed deep remorse for the pain it had caused and wished that he had listened to Hepburn's concerns. The admission was a rare moment of accountability from a director who had spent decades defending his work. But it came too late to undo the damage. Rooney remained defensive about the role for decades. In interviews, he stated that it broke his heart that critics labeled it racist, claiming he only performed it for pure comedic value. He insisted that he had no malicious intent, that he was simply trying to make people laugh. He argued that he had played other ethnic characters in the past and had never received such criticism. But his defense was hollow, a refusal to acknowledge the pain his performance had caused. The character he had portrayed was not a harmless joke. It was a perpetuation of harmful stereotypes that had real-world consequences. The legacy of the Mr. Yunyoshi controversy is a stain on the film's reputation. It serves as a reminder of Hollywood's long history of insensitivity and cultural appropriation, a history that continues to be written and rewritten. The portrayal of Mr. Yunyoshi is not just offensive. It is a symbol of the industry's failure to represent marginalized communities with dignity and respect. The controversy has been discussed in countless retrospectives, and it has been criticized by scholars, activists, and film enthusiasts alike. The fallout from the Mr. Yunyoshi controversy would extend far beyond the film itself. It would shape the way that Hollywood approached representation in the years to come. And it would serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of stereotyping. But for the cast and crew of Breakfast at Tiffany's, the controversy was just one more chapter in a production marked by conflict and tension. The film that had been so difficult to make would be remembered not just for its achievements, but for its failures. and the question of whether the film could ever truly be redeemed would linger for decades. The fallout beyond Tiffany's. The drama that had defined the production of Breakfast at Tiffany's did not end when the cameras stopped rolling. The fallout from the film would ripple through the careers and lives of everyone involved, leaving lasting scars and unexpected triumphs. The story of what happened after the film wrapped is as compelling as the film itself. Truman Capote, the author of the original novella, never forgave Paramount for what they had done to his story. He had envisioned a dark, gritty tale about a wounded call girl navigating the shadows of New York City. What he got was a sanitized, whimsical romance that bore little resemblance to his original vision. Capote publicly called it the most miscast film he had ever seen, a bitter condemnation that reflected his profound disappointment. He actively alienated himself from the studio for the rest of his life, refusing to have anything to do with the film or its legacy. The betrayal was personal, a violation of his artistic integrity that he could never fully forgive. George Peppard, the man who had divided the set with his explosive ego and condescending attitude, faced immediate career consequences. His reputation for being volatile and unmanageable spread rapidly through Hollywood, causing major directors to actively avoid casting him for high-profile leading roles throughout the late 1960s and 70s. The actor, who had been seen as a rising star, was now considered too difficult to work with, a liability that no studio wanted to take on. The roles dried up, and Peppard found himself trapped in a cycle of mediocrity, his talent overshadowed by his toxic behavior. The humiliation reached its peak in 1980, when Aaron Spelling hired Peppard to play the oil tycoon patriarch Blake Carrington in the pilot episode of the primetime soap opera Dynasty. It was a plum role, a chance for Peppard to revive his career and prove that he had changed. But true to form, Peppard spent 3 weeks on set, loudly fighting with executive producers over his character's morality and demanding script overhauls. He insisted that his character should be more noble, more virtuous, and he refused to accept the morally ambiguous role that had been written for him. ABC executives completely ran out of patience. They fired Peppard right off the Dynasty set, threw away his filmed pilot footage, and immediately replaced him with John Forsythe. The humiliation was complete, a public rejection that confirmed everything Hollywood had suspected about him. Peppard spent years in career limbo, his reputation in tatters. It was not until 1983 that he found late career redemption as Colonel John Hannibal Smith on NBC's massive television hit, The A-Team. The role was a perfect fit, a charismatic leader who commanded respect and loyalty. But even then, his toxic traits remained. He famously refused to speak directly to co-star Mr. T on set for years, using crew members as messengers. The behavior was a sign that Peppard had not changed, that the arrogance and condescension that had defined him on the set of Breakfast at Tiffany's were still there, lurking beneath the surface. Audrey Hepburn, the luminous star of the film, capitalized on her massive $750,000 salary for Breakfast at Tiffany's to star in My Fair Lady, before stepping away from Hollywood to dedicate her life to humanitarian work. The salary made her the second highest-paid actress at the time, behind Elizabeth Taylor, a testament to her star power and her ability to command top dollar. But Hepburn was never content to rest on her laurels. She used her fame and fortune to make a difference in the world, traveling to some of the most impoverished regions on the planet to advocate for children. Her work with UNICEF would become her greatest legacy, a reminder that true stardom is measured not by box office receipts, but by the impact one has on the lives of others. Patricia Neal, the co-star who had initially championed Peppard, before coming to dislike him, faced her own trials. Shortly after the film, Neil suffered 3 near-fatal brain aneurysms that left her in a coma and paralyzed. The prognosis was grim, and doctors did not expect her to survive. But Neil was a fighter. She miraculously retrained herself to walk and speak, defying the odds and returning to acting. Her resilience was rewarded with an Academy Award for HUD in 1963 and an Oscar nomination for The Subject Was Roses in 1968. Breakfast at Tiffany's is a reminder that the films we love are often born out of chaos and conflict. The road to Tiffany's was paved with compromise, creative battles, and personal struggles that would leave lasting scars on everyone involved. But from that chaos came a film that would captivate audiences for generations. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.